1830, Pennsylvania. The horrifying story of the Whispering Oak Brothel and its 32 unfortunate victims. In the remote Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania, where a treacherous trail carved its difficult path toward the new settlements of Ohio, there stood a brothel that travelers spoke of in enchanted whispers. They said that the Whispering Oak brothel offered a charm that no other place could match, a warmth that far surpassed strong liquor and intoxicating dances. Madame Eleanor Voss and her 6 beautiful and talented prostitutes ran this earthly paradise, and weary men would arrive as drifters but leave feeling as if they had found a sanctuary, something worthy of braving any danger to return to. The reputation of Whispering Oak spread far along the trade routes. Merchants would delay important shipments just for one more night, immersed in the prostitutes' pampering. Daring hunters would willingly cross treacherous forests rather than miss the opportunity to experience the legendary reception here, and those who had set foot there often spoke of a comfort that lonely souls rarely found. A care so private, so intimate, that even the most hardened men would choke up when it was time to leave. But in the spring of 1847, something changed. Survivors began to tell frightening tales at settlements along the road. They insisted that the trail leading to the Whispering Oak had become littered with abandoned wagons and lost horses wandering aimlessly. Initially, local authorities dismissed these rumors, considering them merely the wild fears of travelers, until an alarming pattern emerged that no one could ignore. Dozens of men had vanished without a trace, and the last place anyone had seen them was on the gloomy trail leading to the inviting door of the Whispering Oak brothel. Before we continue with the story of what truly happened in those remote Allegheny Mountains, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss stories like this. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners from across the country who share my fascination with America's buried secrets. What the authorities were about to discover would reveal that the charm travelers found at the Whispering Oak brothel came with a price far bloodier than anyone could have imagined. The year was 1830, when Eleanor Voss, a 35-year-old widow with a mysterious past, acquired an old inn deep in the Allegheny Range. With a sharp business mind and experience gained from her years as a prostitute in Philadelphia, Eleanor transformed the place into the Whispering Oak brothel. She selected 6 young women, each possessing a special skill to attract and ensnare travelers. Lillian, 25, possessed a mesmerizing beauty and a talent for psychological manipulation, specializing in seducing wealthy merchants and making them pour out their hearts. Rose, 23, inherited secret knowledge of herbs, capable of brewing mesmerizing drugs from forest plants to create special liquors. Clara, 21, had an enchanting voice that could soften the hardest of hearts, making travelers forget all their vigilance. Violet, 20, was skilled in intoxicating dances that could hold any guest captive through all-night parties. Ivy, 19, had an innocent and pure appearance, specializing in using intimate conversations to extract information about guests' wealth and itineraries. And Daisy, the youngest at 18, had sophisticated thieving skills, able to lift wallets and valuables without anyone noticing. The Whispering Oak brothel was built in the shadow of a giant, ancient oak tree back when the trail was just a dangerous path through the wilderness. By 1830, it had become one of the most infamous stopping points for merchants, hunters, and migrants seeking solace on their arduous journey. The main house, a sturdy 2-story log structure, was hidden behind dense foliage overlooking a misty valley. Inside was a cozy common hall with an ever-roaring fireplace and 6 lavishly decorated private rooms ready to serve high-paying guests. But what made Whispering Oak special wasn't just its appearance. It was the reputation for pampering that Eleanor had carefully cultivated. Travelers from distant places would speak of intoxicating nights, of Clara's singing, Violet's dances, and the feeling of being loved that Lillian provided. Eleanor had built something more powerful than temptation. It was blind trust. The brothel also had a single handyman. Amos Reed, a local hunter who lived nearby, was the only one trusted to carry out the special jobs that required silence and ruthlessness. His knowledge of the ravines and underground streams was invaluable, and his silence had been bought with gold. The summer of 1830 marked the beginning of what travelers would later remember as the golden years of the brothel. Eleanor and her girls, initially working together for survival, discovered they possessed a terrifying ability to make guests feel not just welcome, but desired and adored. Eleanor's shrewdness kept the operation profitable. Lillian's deadly charm kept guests lingering longer than planned. Clara's voice and Violet's dances enhanced their reputation as a den of pleasure, and the innocence of Ivy and Daisy made even the most suspicious men smile and open up. But something rotten was spreading beneath this alluring facade. The isolation that had once been a business advantage now provided something else entirely. Privacy. And privacy for 7 women with calculating minds and no moral compass could be a truly dangerous weapon. It was a winter evening in 1832 when Henry Caldwell arrived at the Whispering Oak, and with him came the first sign of the encroaching darkness. Caldwell was a wealthy merchant from Philadelphia, traveling alone with a heavy purse of gold intended for buying land in Ohio. He was a 50-year-old man, long widowed, with no children and few relatives, exactly the type of prey that Eleanor and her prostitutes later learned to identify with chilling precision. The weather was freezing, and snow was beginning to fall heavily as Caldwell's horse found its way to the warm lights of the brothel. Eleanor greeted him at the door with a well-practiced smile, immediately noticing the fine fabric of his coat, the weight of his saddlebags, and most importantly, the deep-seated loneliness in his eyes. A man traveling alone with a fortune carried more than just money. He carried a desperation for human warmth. "Welcome to Whispering Oak, sir," Eleanor said, her voice a perfect blend of formality and intimacy. "I am Eleanor Voss, and these are my girls. We will ensure your stay here is everything you've ever dreamed of." Caldwell's eyes lit up as he took in the warm main hall, smelled the fragrant roasted meat, and saw Lillian smiling at him. This was exactly what a lonely widower needed. A place where beautiful women would treat him like a king, not just another paying customer. For the next 3 days, the prostitutes gave Caldwell an experience he had never dreamed of. Sumptuous meals, an endless flow of fine wine, Clara's voice pouring sweet words into his ear, and Violet's dances making him forget his way. But it was Lillian who gave Caldwell what he truly craved, the illusion of love. On the second night, after the other guests were drunk, Lillian found Caldwell sitting alone by the fire, his vacant eyes staring into the flames. She approached him with a flask of precious wine. "You seem troubled, Mr. Caldwell," she whispered, sitting down beside him. "Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter." For the next 2 hours, Caldwell poured out his heart to the beautiful woman. He spoke of his late wife, of his lonely years, of the empty feeling of returning to a cold house. Lillian listened with perfect empathy, occasionally touching his hand, leaning closer with elaborately feigned compassion. "Loneliness is a terrible thing," she said as the fire died down, "but it doesn't have to last forever." What happened next was never recorded, but Caldwell's behavior the next morning said it all. He walked about with the contented expression of a man who had rediscovered his reason for living. He decided to stay for 3 more days, despite his plans to buy land in Ohio. Most importantly, he began talking about returning to Whispering Oak on his way back. "I have never been treated like this," he told Eleanor as he prepared to leave. "You and your girls have created something truly special. I will recommend this place to everyone." Eleanor smiled and accepted his generous payment, nearly double the required amount, pressed into her hand with sincere gratitude. "We will always be waiting for you, Mr. Caldwell. Safe travels." But Henry Caldwell would never complete his journey to Ohio. His horse was found a few days later, wandering near a ravine. Caldwell himself had vanished, leaving only a mystery that no one bothered to investigate seriously. The assumption, logical enough for the treacherous mountains, was that he had fallen victim to highwaymen or wild beasts. Only Eleanor and her prostitutes knew the truth. Amos Reed, the hunter, had been waiting in a dense forest a mile from the brothel when Caldwell left that morning. The man knew every trail and possessed a quiet ruthlessness, making him the perfect tool for tasks requiring absolute discretion. Caldwell never saw the blow that ended his life, delivered with a hunting axe to the back of his neck. His body was thrown into a predetermined deep ravine, where the swift current and wild animals would do the rest, while his heavy purse of gold found its way back to the secret cellar under the Whispering Oak. That night, Eleanor and the 6 girls sat around the dining table, counting Caldwell's gold and planning their future. Eleanor had done the calculations. The amount they had just acquired far exceeded the brothel's legitimate profits for an entire year. Lillian had proven that lonely men could be manipulated with shocking ease. Rose had shown that traces could be erased with knowledge of poisons, and the other girls had proven that even the most innocent-seeming people could keep terrible secrets. "No one will look for him," Eleanor said, her voice cold as she stacked the gold coins. "A widower, no children, traveling alone to a place where no one knows him. Perfect. Almost too easy," Lillian added, still wearing the seductive smile she had used to enchant her victim. "He was ready to give us everything." What they had discovered on that cold winter night was something more powerful than beauty. They had discovered how to make people disappear. The winter of 1832 gave Eleanor and her prostitutes time to perfect their methods and establish the protocols that would serve them for nearly 2 decades. Eleanor, with the mind of a cunning madam, developed a system to identify the ideal prey. A man traveling alone, carrying a lot of cash, with few family ties and no specific schedule that might raise an alarm if he disappeared. Rose's role expanded beyond mixing drinks. Her knowledge of mountain herbs extended to a detailed study of poisons. Belladonna berries could cause hallucinations and memory loss. Water hemlock could kill within hours, leaving few traces. She created a secret herb garden behind the brothel, disguised as a simple kitchen garden. Lillian perfected the art of emotional manipulation. She studied her targets carefully, transforming herself to fit their desires. For the pious man, she became devout. For the scholar, she became a witty conversationalist. The ability to become whatever a man needed was her most terrifying weapon. Ivy and Daisy, though young, played a crucial role. Ivy's innocence was the perfect cover, allowing her to extract information about guests' backgrounds, plans, and finances without arousing suspicion. Meanwhile, Daisy ensured that no valuable items were left behind, and Amos Reed handled the final step. He was a master of disposal. Bodies were carried away under the cover of darkness, thrown into ravines or buried in swampy areas where they would never be found. Personal effects were sorted, gold and silver were kept, while anything that could identify the victim was burned or buried separately. The spring of 1833 brought their second victim, a fur trapper named Jacob Reed from New York. Reed was carrying nearly $800 in cash, the profits from a successful trapping trip. He was a 40-year-old man, known for his gruff personality and his habit of traveling alone to avoid sharing his profits. Reed arrived on a chilly April evening, immediately drawn to the warmth and laughter emanating from the brothel. After weeks of wandering in the forest, Eleanor and her girls deployed their strategy perfectly. Eleanor chatted with him about market prices, learning about his financial situation and plans. Rose served hearty meals that made him reluctant to leave. Ivy and Daisy used their youth to make him feel important and worldly. But it was Clara who sealed Reed's fate. On the third night, she found him sitting alone in the main hall, cleaning his hunting rifle. She approached, asking him about his hunting stories, and with her clear voice, she sang him folk songs about the mountains and adventures. Clara approached with feigned shyness, asking if he could tell her about his hunting trips, as she, a mountain girl, always longed to hear stories of the wider world. For 2 hours, Reed enthusiastically told Clara about his encounters with bears and the cold winter nights in the forest. His voice grew more boisterous and confident as she listened with rapt admiration. When he finished, she placed her hand gently on his sturdy arm and told him he was the bravest man she had ever met. The loneliness that had hardened around the gruff hunter's heart for decades began to melt. "I've never met anyone like you," he said, his voice hoarse with emotions he had long suppressed. "You make me feel alive again." "Then don't be in a hurry to leave tomorrow," Clara replied, her eyes reflecting the firelight with perfectly calculated sincerity. "Stay another day. Tell me more of your stories." Reed extended his stay for another week. During that time, Lillian and Clara gradually increased their intimacy, while Rose began adding small amounts of belladonna extract to his evening liquor. The symptoms began subtly: a slight headache, a feeling of light-headedness, nothing alarming enough to cause immediate concern. Reed attributed his discomfort to drinking too much and the emotional turmoil from the unexpected attention he was receiving. On his final night at the Whispering Oak, Lillian invited Reed to a private dinner in her room. Rose had prepared his favorite roast meat, along with a bottle of strong liquor, laced with a carefully calculated dose of water hemlock extract. As Reed sat opposite Lillian in the intimate candlelight, sharing his dreams of a settled life with the woman he believed would be his, he had no idea he was on the verge of death. The poison worked exactly as Rose had predicted. Reed's death appeared to be a sudden stroke, brought on by excessive drinking and excitement. His body was discovered the next morning in Lillian's bed, apparently having passed away peacefully in his sleep after a night of passion. Even if a doctor had examined him, the symptoms were perfectly consistent with a natural stroke in a middle-aged man with a habit of drinking. Amos Reed took care of the rest. Under the cover of darkness, Jacob Reed's body was thrown into the same ravine that had swallowed their first victim. His money and valuable personal effects disappeared into Eleanor's growing treasury, while his hunting rifle and furs were sold to passing traders weeks later. His disappearance was attributed to his decision to venture deeper into the wilderness in search of new hunting grounds, a plausible explanation that no one bothered to question. By the end of 1833, Eleanor and the prostitutes had perfected a system that was virtually undetectable. They had learned to space out their crimes, never targeting more than 2 or 3 victims a year to avoid creating a suspicious pattern. They developed perfect cover stories for guests who left suddenly, from strokes to hunting accidents to the decision to seek a new life in the West. Most importantly, they had learned to trust each other completely, creating a conspiracy so tight that not a whisper of their activities ever reached the outside world. Just when we thought we had seen it all, the horror at the Whispering Oak deepens. If this story is sending chills down your spine, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit the like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's find out what happens next. Because Eleanor Voss and her prostitutes were just getting started. From 1834 to 1846, the Whispering Oak brothel achieved a reputation that spread throughout the trails of Pennsylvania and beyond. Travelers spoke of it with the same longing tone reserved for the most luxurious establishments in Philadelphia or New York. Eleanor and her prostitutes had created something unprecedented. A remote brothel that provided luxury and pampering services on par with the most extravagant dens of pleasure. Eleanor had significantly expanded her legitimate business operations. The brothel now maintained a bar with expensive imported liquors, hosted lavish parties, and even offered recreational trips for wealthy groups of merchants. These legitimate activities provided substantial income and, more importantly, gave Eleanor the reputation of a successful, respectable businesswoman, not just a common madam. The guest log from this period, which Eleanor kept meticulously, told the story of their success. Merchants from Philadelphia, politicians from Harrisburg, land speculators from New York, and adventurers from distant places had signed their names in Eleanor's elegant book. Many returned multiple times, becoming loyal patrons who praised Whispering Oak to their colleagues and friends as a paradise on earth. But hidden behind this legitimate success was an elaborately orchestrated killing machine, operating with cold precision. Eleanor and her prostitutes had refined their victim selection into an exact science. Lillian had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify the men who would never be missed. The loners, the outcasts, those carrying secrets that made them flee from relationships. Rose's knowledge of poisons had expanded to include dozens of plant and mushroom toxins, each with different symptoms and onset times, easily disguised as illness. Ivy had learned to extract the most detailed personal information from guests through innocent conversations, and Eleanor coordinated it all with the precision of a military campaign. During these years, they murdered approximately 32 victims. Each death was carefully planned and executed according to strict protocols to minimize risk while maximizing profit. They developed detailed profiles of their targets, sometimes observing potential victims for days before making their final decision. Consider the case of Elias Thorne, a geologist from Boston who arrived in October 1840. Thorne was surveying coal deposits for a railroad company, a job that required him to travel alone through remote areas for months at a time. He carried expensive surveying equipment, along with a large sum of money to acquire mining rights he had identified as promising. Eleanor immediately recognized Thorne as an ideal target. His work required prolonged absences from civilization, meaning his disappearance might not be noticed for months. His surveying activities provided a perfect cover story. He could easily have fallen victim to a landslide, a fall from a cliff, or any number of natural hazards while working alone in treacherous territory. Most importantly, Thorne's somewhat dry and work-focused personality meant he had very few close friends who would put in the effort to investigate if he failed to return. Eleanor and her prostitutes began their campaign immediately. Rose prepared sumptuous meals with dishes she knew would appeal to a man from the city, creating a sense of luxury in the midst of the wilderness. Clara and Violet engaged him in conversations about his survey work, expressing admiration for his scientific knowledge and making him feel valued. Eleanor discussed the economic potential of the land, positioning herself as a local expert who could help him identify lucrative investment opportunities. But it was Lillian who delivered the blow that sealed Thorne's fate. She approached him not as a common prostitute, but as a kindred spirit, an intelligent woman who was also fascinated by the mysteries of the earth. She revealed a surprising knowledge of geology and minerals, knowledge she had actually gleaned from previous victims. She accompanied him on short survey trips around the area, demonstrating an intelligence and interest that Thorne found irresistible. "I have never met a woman who understands rocks and earth like you do," Thorne told her during one trip, his professional reserve finally breaking. "Most people only see trees and mud, but you see the structure and the history beneath." "I have lived here my whole life," Lillian replied, stepping closer to him as they stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. "These mountains have taught me things that books never could. Things about formation, about erosion, and about the treasures hidden within." Thorne extended his planned 3-day stay to 2 weeks, ostensibly to conduct a more thorough survey, but in reality because he had become completely enchanted by Lillian. During this time, Rose gradually introduced a toxin extracted from mushrooms into his food, creating symptoms that mimicked typhoid fever, a real danger in remote areas. The poison Rose used was her own special creation. It caused slow liver and kidney failure over several days. The symptoms perfectly matched those of typhoid, and even an experienced doctor would have found it difficult to distinguish between them. Thorne's death appeared to be a tragic accident due to illness, a completely foreseeable occupational hazard. His surveying equipment was sold to a merchant in a distant town, while his detailed maps became part of Eleanor's growing collection of information about the region's resources. His body, disposed of by Amos Reed, joined the others at the bottom of the deep ravine, while his name was recorded as another victim of disease on the frontier. The brilliance of Eleanor's operation lay not just in their killing methods, but in their ability to maintain an illusion of respectability. She attended church services in the nearby settlement, contributed generously to community causes, and maintained good relationships with influential families. Eleanor served on the local trade council, while Rose often provided medicinal herbs to neighboring farms. The other girls participated in social events, bringing together families in the region. This community involvement served multiple purposes. It provided them with alibis and character witnesses. It gave them access to information about travelers passing through the area. Most importantly, it established Eleanor as a pillar of the community, a person whose word would never be questioned by local authorities. Eleanor also developed a vast business network to legitimize her growing wealth. She invested in land purchases throughout the region, gradually assembling a profitable property portfolio. She loaned money to local merchants and farm owners, earning both interest and influence in the community. She even bought shares in stagecoach lines and river transport companies, diversifying her investments and creating additional sources of income. By 1846, Eleanor Voss and the Whispering Oak Brothel had become a force in western Pennsylvania. Her success story was held up as an example of what a determined woman could achieve, even in the challenging frontier environment. Local newspapers sometimes ran articles praising the businesswoman Eleanor Voss, who had built a thriving business empire from a rundown old inn. But beneath that facade of legitimate success lay the carefully concealed secrets of more than 30 men who had made the fatal mistake of accepting the prostitute's charms. Each death had added to their wealth and perfected their methods, creating a cycle of murder and profit that seemed impossible to stop or detect. The isolation that had initially protected them from discovery now provided something even more valuable: the perfect environment for their predatory activities. The Whispering Oak had become a spider's web, beautiful and inviting on the surface, but deadly to anyone who became entangled in its threads. The beginning of the end came not from law enforcement or suspicious relatives, but from an unexpected source: one of their own prostitutes. Daisy, the youngest prostitute, had become increasingly unstable. The years of participating in the crimes had taken a heavy psychological toll. She began to be haunted by nightmares. Night after night, she dreamed of the victims' faces, standing under the ancient oak tree, looking at her with silent but judgmental eyes. Her inner turmoil led Daisy to seek solace in alcohol. But alcohol brought its own problems: paranoia, mood swings, and a tendency to talk loosely, making her increasingly dangerous to the entire operation. The crisis began on an autumn night in 1846. Daisy, in a drunken state, sought out Lillian, whom she looked up to as an older sister. "I can't do this anymore," Daisy whispered, her voice trembling with alcohol and fear. "I see their faces every night. Every time I close my eyes, they're standing there, under the oak tree, looking at me. Dozens of them, Lillian. Dozens of souls crying out." Lillian maintained her cold composure, but her mind raced as she calculated the threat Daisy now represented. The girl knew too much. She could provide the authorities with descriptions of the victims, the murder methods, and testimony that would send them all to the gallows. "You're drunk, Daisy," Lillian said softly, moving closer and putting an arm around her younger sister with feigned concern. "You're tired and seeing things that aren't real." "No." Daisy's voice rose dangerously, and Lillian glanced towards the guest rooms, hoping no one had heard. "I know what we've done. I know what you made me do, and I know it has to stop." Lillian tried to soothe Daisy, promising that everything would be all right, that they would talk when she was more sober. She finally convinced Daisy to return to her room with the promise that they would find a solution. But Lillian knew there would be no solution. Daisy had become a liability that threatened everything they had built, and liabilities had to be eliminated. Eleanor, when informed, agreed without a moment's hesitation. A few days later, Eleanor hosted a small party to celebrate a successful business deal. She explained it was a gesture to strengthen their sisterly bond. The party featured Daisy's favorite foods, along with a special wine that Rose had prepared. The wine contained a concentrated mushroom extract, enough to cause slow organ failure and make the death look like a sudden, violent illness. Daisy died quietly in her sleep that night. Her death was announced as being due to a sudden, violent illness, a mysterious disease common in the mountains. Rose, with her medical knowledge, confirmed this, and Daisy was buried in a corner of the garden, a tragic departure that was perfectly staged. Daisy's death solved their immediate problem, but created an unfixable underground crack. The remaining girls, especially Ivy, who was close to Daisy, began to feel uneasy. Their loyalty, built on greed and fear, was now wavering under the weight of a crime they had committed against one of their own. Eleanor realized that her operation was entering a dangerous phase. The network of complicity that had protected them for nearly 2 decades was beginning to fracture. Any unusual event could trigger an investigation that not even her influence could suppress. She began to consider contingency plans, perhaps even abandoning the Whispering Oak. The last victim to die at the Whispering Oak brothel was Marcus Thorne, a land speculator from Baltimore, who arrived in March 1847 with a large amount of cash. Thorne was a sharp man in his 42nd, on his way to Ohio to finalize a major deal. His death followed the established script, a sudden heart attack after several days of being doted on by the prostitutes, especially Lillian. But Thorne's death marked a crucial change. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, they had made a significant mistake. Thorne had arranged to meet a business partner in Pittsburgh on a specific date, and when he didn't show up, this colleague, a well-connected man, started making inquiries. Those inquiries eventually reached the local authorities. Sheriff Elias Conway of Allegheny County was a capable lawman with the experience of a former hunter, but he had never encountered anything like the rumors surrounding the Whispering Oak. His initial investigation was routine, a few questions to confirm that Thorne had indeed stayed at the brothel and had left in good health. Eleanor provided her usual testimony, supported by carefully kept books, showing Thorne's departure date and intended destination. But Conway was more persistent than his predecessors. His investigation began to uncover small inconsistencies in Eleanor's story. An innkeeper in the next county remembered seeing a man matching Thorne's description, but several days after, he was supposed to have passed through the area. A merchant recalled selling some supplies to someone resembling Thorne, but again, the timing didn't match the official departure date from the Whispering Oak. These discrepancies were minor and could have been explained by many innocent factors, but they were enough to plant seeds of doubt in Conway's mind. He began to look more closely at other missing persons cases involving travelers last seen in the brothel's vicinity, and the pattern that emerged was deeply disturbing. Sheriff Conway's investigation accelerated rapidly as he began to examine the broader pattern of disappearances around the Whispering Oak brothel. A review of county records revealed that over the years, at least a dozen missing persons cases involved travelers last confirmed to be at this brothel. While individual cases could be explained by the dangers of the frontier, the statistical coincidence was impossible to ignore. Conway was careful not to alert Eleanor to his investigation, conducting his inquiries discreetly and avoiding direct contact with anyone connected to the brothel. His breakthrough came when he approached Jonah Miller, the fur trapper who had initially reported the news. Jonah, still haunted by Daisy's story and increasingly suspicious of what was happening, proved more cooperative than ever. That girl, Daisy, she was terrified before she died, Jonah told Conway during a secret meeting by a stream far from prying eyes. She spoke of the secrets of the oak, things that kept her up at night. That place isn't just a brothel, Sheriff. Something is very wrong there. This statement, combined with the inconsistencies Conway had already discovered, solidified his resolve. He recognized the signs of a larger conspiracy, a dangerous truth being hidden. He arranged a formal interrogation with Amos Reed, the hunter, whom he suspected was the weakest link. Amos's confession was halting and incomplete. Years of loyalty to Eleanor and fear battled with his instinct for self-preservation. He didn't dare directly accuse Eleanor, but he provided enough details about mysterious nighttime trips to the ravine, heavy sacks, and the gold coins he received for his silence. This gave Conway the evidence he needed to obtain a search warrant. The raid on the Whispering Oak brothel was conducted at dawn on the 20th of April, 1847, with a force of 6 armed deputies surrounding the house to prevent any escape. Eleanor and her prostitutes faced the arrival of law enforcement with practiced composure. Eleanor greeted Conway at the front door with a polite smile, expressing her hope that she could assist with any misunderstanding that had brought him to her establishment. Lillian appeared genuinely distressed at the suggestion that anything improper could have occurred at their respectable place. Rose offered to prepare tea for the officers, while Clara, Violet, and Ivy appeared confused and frightened by the accusations, but their performances could not hide the physical evidence that nearly 2 decades of murder had left behind. The search of the brothel revealed several items that clearly belonged to missing travelers. A distinctive signet ring engraved with Marcus Thorne's initials, a brass compass belonging to Elias Thorne, and a collection of letters, pocket watches, and personal items representing dozens of different victims. Even more damning was Rose's secret herb garden, which contained several poisonous plants with no common application. Her collection of books on botany and toxicology revealed an expertise far beyond what a normal herbalist would require. Hidden in Eleanor's room, investigators found a secret ledger detailing the assets of each victim. The discovery of the secret cellar under the floorboards was the final piece needed to confirm the scale of the crimes. Amos Reed, facing the gallows, led investigators to the cleverly disguised trapdoor. Inside, just as Jonah Miller had overheard, was a bloody treasure, and outside, at the bottom of the deep ravine, the search uncovered skeletal remains, eroded by time and animals, silent proof of the brutality of the Whispering Oak brothel. Inside the cellar, just as Sheriff Conway suspected, was a bloody treasure worth thousands of dollars. And at the bottom of the ravine, the search unearthed the skeletons of 32 men. Each skeleton told its own story of violent death. Some skulls showed signs of being crushed from behind. Other skeletons had no clear signs of trauma, suggesting the victims had likely died of poisoning, just as investigators suspected. The trial of Eleanor Voss and her prostitutes became one of the most sensational legal cases in Pennsylvania history. Newspapers across the country covered the case, fascinated by the story of a madam and 6 young women who had operated one of the most successful serial killing rings in American history. The prosecution, led by the Allegheny County prosecutor, presented overwhelming evidence of a conspiracy that had lasted nearly 2 decades and claimed the lives of more than 30 people. Eleanor maintained a cold and contemptuous demeanor throughout the proceedings, claiming all the evidence was planted by enemies trying to seize her business. Lillian broke down completely during her testimony, alternating between denials and tearful confessions, blaming Eleanor for forcing everyone. Rose refused to say anything, maintaining a stoic silence that many interpreted as an admission of guilt. Clara, Violet, and Ivy, the younger and more sympathetic defendants, claimed to have been coerced by Eleanor and Lillian, begging for mercy from the court. Daisy's confession, recorded before her death, was read in court, becoming the most damning piece of evidence. The defense strategy focused on the isolation and vulnerability of young women trying to survive in a harsh frontier environment. Their lawyer argued that they had been driven to desperate measures by circumstance and Eleanor's manipulation. But the overwhelming evidence and the shocking scale of the crimes made any sympathy difficult to sustain. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning guilty verdicts for all the living defendants on multiple counts of first-degree murder. The sentencing was swift and final. Eleanor Voss, Lillian, Rose, Clara, Violet, and Ivy were all sentenced to hang. Their execution was scheduled for October 1847. Amos Reed, for his cooperation, received a 15-year prison sentence and died in prison a few years later. The execution was carried out as scheduled on a grey October morning, with hundreds of spectators gathered to witness the end of the story of the Whispering Oak Brothel. Eleanor faced her death with the same cold composure she had shown throughout the trial, offering no final words of remorse or explanation. The other girls trembled and wept, clinging to each other in their final moments. Lillian, Rose, Clara, Violet, and Ivy stood together on the gallows, holding hands as the nooses were placed around their necks, a final moment of female solidarity, as a stark contrast to the calculated cruelty they had shown their victims. Jonah Miller, the fur trapper who had bravely reported them, disappeared shortly after the trial ended. Some rumors said he went west, to Ohio, to forget what he had witnessed. The trauma of exposing the crimes seemed to have made it impossible for him to settle anywhere or trust anyone again. Amos Reed, the hunter, faced charges as an accessory to murder, but thanks to his cooperation, his sentence was reduced to 15 years in prison. He died in prison in 1853, reportedly remaining silent, never speaking another word about the activities at the brothel. The Whispering Oak Brothel itself was sold at auction. The new owners, a family from Pittsburgh, tried to continue operating it as a legitimate inn, but the property's notorious reputation made it impossible to attract guests. The building stood empty for several years before being completely demolished by fearful locals. The ancient oak tree was cut down in 1849, but it was rumored that its whispers could still be heard on the mountain wind. The ravine where the victims' remains were discovered was sealed by a deliberate landslide under court order. A simple stone marker was erected nearby to commemorate the 32 men who died at the Whispering Oak Brothel. The plaque, which local historical societies say still exists today, bears only the inscription, "Here lie unknown travelers, 1832 to 1847. May they find in death the peace that was denied to them in life." The case had far-reaching implications for the regulation of inns and entertainment establishments throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states. New laws were enacted, requiring more detailed guest registration procedures, mandatory reporting of guest deaths to local authorities, and regular inspections of establishments serving travelers. The Whispering Oak laws, as they came to be known, helped tighten security for those traveling on desolate routes. Perhaps, most importantly, the case of the Whispering Oak Brothel became a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation and the potential for evil to flourish in places far from the oversight of civilized society. Criminal investigators began to pay more attention to patterns of disappearances around remote establishments, leading to the discovery of several smaller-scale operations that might otherwise have continued undetected. The financial investigation revealed the true scale of Eleanor's success. Her estate, including land, investments, and cash, was valued at over $30,000, a massive fortune at the time. The money was used to compensate the few victims' families that could be identified and to fund improvements to law enforcement capabilities in the remote areas of Pennsylvania. Modern criminologists who have studied the case note several factors that contributed to the incredible success of Eleanor and her prostitutes. Their operation combined careful victim selection, sophisticated killing methods, excellent body disposal techniques, and most importantly, a perfect cover story that made their crimes nearly invisible to contemporary investigators. The isolation of their location provided privacy for their activities, while their reputation for charm created a steady stream of potential victims. Psychological profiles developed by modern experts suggest that Eleanor was the main architect of the operation, possessing the traits of a psychopath with the organizational skills necessary to plan and execute such a complex criminal enterprise. Lillian likely suffered from borderline personality disorder, making her capable of forming intense but ultimately meaningless and predatory emotional connections with victims. Rose's expertise with poisons suggests a fascination with death and control that was almost sadistic. The roles of the other girls remain ambiguous. Whether they were willing participants or coerced accomplices may never be definitively determined. What makes the case of the Whispering Oak brothel particularly chilling is how easily it could have continued indefinitely. If Daisy hadn't had a psychological breakdown and confessed in her drunken state, or if Sheriff Conway had been less persistent in his investigation, Eleanor and her prostitutes might have continued their activities for decades longer. The randomness of their ultimate discovery serves as a reminder that many historical crimes may have gone completely undetected, their perpetrators taking their secrets to unmarked graves. The story of the Whispering Oak brothel also highlights the vulnerability of travelers in that era. When communication was slow and transportation was dangerous, a man could disappear between two towns and not be missed for months, if at all. Eleanor exploited this vulnerability with ruthless efficiency, turning the entertainment industry itself into a weapon against the lonely and isolated. Local folklore in western Pennsylvania has preserved distorted versions of the brothel's story for generations. Some tales portray the prostitutes as victims of circumstance. Others transform them into seductive phantoms, luring victims through magical means rather than simple manipulation. The truth, as revealed by court records, is both more mundane and more terrifying than any ghost story. The actual location of the brothel became a source of local superstition well into the 20th century. Hunters and hikers reported finding unusual artifacts in the area: old buttons, scraps of cloth, rusted metal objects that might have once belonged to the victims. Whether these discoveries were genuine relics or simply the products of imaginations influenced by the location's notorious history remains unknown. The Whispering Oak case file, housed in the Pennsylvania State Archives, continues to attract researchers and amateur historians fascinated by one of America's most successful serial killing operations. Eleanor's detailed records, combined with Rose's notes on poisons and the physical evidence recovered from the property, provide an unusually complete picture of how such crimes were planned and executed in the 19th century. This mystery shows us how easily evil can hide behind a facade of charm and how isolation can provide the perfect cover for the most heinous crimes. The story of the Whispering Oak brothel is a reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like beautiful women, offering weary travelers exactly what they desire most. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or might there be more secrets buried in those Allegheny Mountains? Leave your comment below and tell me what you think really happened at the Whispering Oak brothel. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. The past is full of dark secrets waiting to be uncovered, and I'll be here to help you discover them. See you in the next story.